into space with the Voyager spacecraft, and it began by taking our mathematical and scientific symbology to try to build up a shared vocabulary, not a full language. Most of it was pictures. But I essentially built my own version of the Voyager Golden Record, messages using Interstellar Common symbology, note the base 12 numbers there, and then tried to expand that into a full writing system and a full language. So here's I don't know why the animations are not in order, but this is a writing sample, which is my torch and the relay. And I started with the math and science symbols, and also concrete images. You might notice there's a fish symbol in there because the fish body plan is pretty universal. So concrete images can have their own glyphs. And then, of course, add new glyphs as needed, but with the proviso that you combine or modify old glyphs preferentially over creating new ones, because people want to keep it simple in contact messages, so they try to use old glyphs that people will understand. And this worked reasonably well, except there's one problem, which I call the indexing problem, which is how do you type this on a keyboard, and how do you organize it in a dictionary. And Chinese does have a number of techniques for this kind of thing, and in fact they are mostly techniques that do not rely on chronology, which seems like it would be exactly what I need, except there's one additional challenge, actually two additional challenges. One is that I'm kind of creating lists of divide beasts, they're created by different species. But the bigger challenge is you need to be able to add new glyphs to the system freely, because every species is going to create its own new glyphs. And that's something we don't really see in Auxlang, unless you count emoji. And we do have a system for emojis, it's called Unicode, but that also does not work very well in asynchronous language development. You can ask me more about these techniques, they're on my poster. But my general plan for how to deal with this was, like Chinese, work with radicals, break down compound glyphs into radicals to try to get a smaller set of them. Divide them up by shape in a way that can be indexed by base 12 numbers, and preferably also by other numbers shape in a way that can be indexed by base 12 numbers, and preferably also by other numbers. And I tried a couple ways of doing this. My first attempt was this a priori notion that we should try to sort with a bounding shape for each character. And I came up with a reasonable set of bounding shapes that I thought might cover all categories, except it was totally unbalanced. There were far too many triangles in the glyphs I created, and far too few heptagons for this set of indices to make any sense. So my second attempt was more experimental, which was to just create a bunch of glyphs and see what shapes were the most common. And I came up with this set of 24, which is better, still not very balanced, but usable, I guess. But I was hoping for something more balanced than this, and actually more base 12 than this. And that's something I'm still trying to figure out. I came up with another way to reduce the number of radicals by looking for commonly applied variations to existing characters. So, like I said, you preferentially modify existing characters over creating new ones, and these are some of the most common modifications. And that also is another thing that kind of works, but not great. And right now, my plan for language is to just look at the top 5,000 letters in English. There's a word list on wordfrequency.org that has that. Without even starting by creating lists, just break that list of lemmas down into likely radicals and likely compounds, and focus on building radicals in hopes that I'll have enough to index them coherently. And if anyone has any better suggestions, I am happy to hear them. And I will take questions. Question?
In terms of sort of a starting vocabulary to build upon to find radicals and whatnot, do you have opinions on the 800 so basic English words that are used on
The Ogden basic English, yes.
Yeah,
I started with the grammar. I did try to start with Ogden, but I didn't get very far because that really wasn't organized the way I need, and doing it by the list of lemmas seems to work better for me. Yes.
Yeah, so if communication is slow and there's lots of different species, I mean, inevitably you're going to have two different species inventing new glyphs for the same word, basically. How is that reconciled?
That's reconciled essentially by the fact that they are dialects, and honestly, this is part of the setting. I've not developed that well yet, but they are dialects of the same language, and the core vocabulary is the same. And also, it's a dialects continuum. So from one star to the next, it's going to change less than if you're transported to the other side of the galaxy. Yes.
Maybe you don't have an answer to this either. I'm just wondering, I don't know how psychologically variable the species are, but given a lot of dialects, can you like point out a weirdest thing some species have done with modality or with anything?
I've got a lot of weird species, but I have not put that together with weird things in the language yet.
Yeah, my question is going to be similar in that are there like misinterpretations that you've now encoded into the language?
Nothing that I've encoded into the language that I recall. There probably are some.
I could see like if alien archaeologists or anthropologists or anything like human anthropologists, you could see the Voyager thing and be like, oh, these people worship the hydrogen atom as like the source of all life in their religion. In fact, we're not a particularly scientific people. That's what we led with.
But how does this language kind of like, how widespread is it? Is it the main dominant language, or is it kind of like a secondary language to the native language of these alien species?
It's meant to be the lingua franca of the galaxy, and in practice, you don't hear it because it's not spoken, but you see it a lot more in trading centers. So it's in large part a trade language.
All right. If there are no more questions, let's switch over. Let's thank Alex again. So Logan is next. You can put the mic on while I'm switching slides. And if Carter Williams is in here, then that'll be the last talk in here. It'd be good to know he was. Yeah. All right. So go get water. It'll be a few minutes. Okay. Put that. Cool. Hey,
is it the one that was slides 3 by 4 with examples? Excellent. Oh, I have.
Hey. Is Carter Williams in here? Over the last speaker in the rooms? No, all right. We'll find them. Okay. There we go. Yeah, it's fitting. Ready to go?
I'm ready to go. Are you ready to go?
I don't know. The people wear the box.
Now is it working? Do I need to reposition the mic? Hello, testing. Okay, lovely.
Moving right along. Next, Logan Kersley will tell us about the three phases of omnipredicationality.
Okay, so first off, does anybody get the not actually pop culture reference from my title? Oh well, it was supposed to be clever, but that doesn't matter. It's not actually relevant to the content. Okay, so actually I'll back up a little bit, because first I have an audience question. What do y'all think omnipredicationality means? Anything can act as a predicate. Cool, what does a predicate mean?
Anything that can follow a copula or be attached to one.
Almost. That's kind of a trick question because there are two different definitions, both of which are relevant at this conference. You learned about one of them in all the Auxlang talks earlier. A predicate is basically a function that takes in arguments and produces a truth value as the output. There's also a linguistic definition of syntactic predication, which is effectively super oversimplifying the combination of logical predication and the assignment of argument roles to other things in the sentence combined with syntactic headedness. So, for the purposes of this talk, omnipredicationality is the idea that anything within some domain of things that we could pick any from is capable of slotting into the syntactic role of a predicate. So, if we want to talk about predication across languages and across theoretical languages that you might construct someday, we need to have some way of talking about syntactic roles and parts of speech that works independent of a specific language. Turns out that's really freaking hard to do. I've talked about that before. So this is not the be-all, end-all of defining parts of speech, but this is the system that we're going to use for this talk. This comes from a paper by Hengeveld, Rykhoff, and Sevierska. You can go look it up later if you want to. But the basic idea is that we define four basic parts of speech that could exist as content words, so we're ignoring all the function words, all the articles and prepositions and inflectional stuff, just talking about content words. And the four major types of content words are defined by their primary function and whether they are a syntactic head or a syntactic modifier. And if you multiply 2 by 2, you get 4 boxes. So something that is the head of a predicate is a verb. Something that modifies a verb is an adverb. Something that is the head of a referential phrase, meaning it names something, it refers to something in the world, that's a noun. Something that modifies a noun is an adjective. Cool, now we're all on the same page. So, there's this other paper by Hengeveld, Rykhoff, and Sevierska, or no, actually this is from the same paper. I forgot which papers I took all my figures from. This is from the same paper. So this, again, not the be-all, end-all of linguistic typology. All models are wrong, but this model is useful a lot of the time. So, they're trying to figure out how different languages divide up parts of speech. And they found this particular pattern that works for a large proportion of languages throughout the world, where at the first level, you don't bother to formally distinguish any of these four functions. You've just got a big bag of words that we call content types. It is debatable whether or not there are any languages that actually work that way. They think that there are. And then as you go down the list, the first part of speech to get separated out from the rest most of the time is verbs. So you have verbs and things that are not verbs. Verbs are things that can be the head of a predicate phrase. Everything else, it can't be the head of a predicate phrase. It could modify a verb, it could be an argument, it could modify an argument, but it's definitely not a verb. And then as we go down the list, you split out more distinct parts of speech in order until you get to the fully differentiated form in the middle. That's where English sits. German is like at number 3, and I don't know. I have examples listed on later slides. We'll get to it because I don't remember them right now. But after the fully differentiated form, you start taking away possibilities. So at level 5, there is no lexical class that has the primary function of being the modifier of a predicate phrase. And as we keep going down, eventually you get to the classification where the only lexical open part of speech is verbs, things that can be the head of a predicate phrase. Maybe they can also do other things. Probably they can do other things because you need to do other things sometimes. But that's going to be the primary function. Hangeveld, Rykhoff, and Sibirska don't think that any languages like that exist, but some other linguists do. So, approach us. What does this mean for omnipredicationality? Type 1. If you only have one part of speech in lexical parts of speech, not functional words, again, you could have as many types of functional words as you want. If you only have one lexical part of speech, then they all behave the same, and you need something to be the head of a predicate phrase. So therefore, everything that is in your lexical class can be the head of a predicate phrase. So various people have argued for Mundari, Indonesian, Rykhoff, and Sibirska, and the other guy. I'm completely forgetting his name as soon as it's off the slide. Anyway, they think that Tongan falls into that class. I don't speak Tongan, so I don't know. Argue with them if you disagree. Type 7, maybe Salishan languages. There's a lot of literature arguing that some of the Salishan languages only have verbs, and that there are no nouns, no lexical nouns at all. Types 2 through 6, that gets a little bit more confusing. So I hope it's obvious to everybody, if your only lexical words are verbs, then obviously everything can be a verb because everything is a verb. If your only class is undifferentiated, then necessarily everything in that class can act as a verb, because if it couldn't, then it would be differentiated. What is happening in the middle for types 2 through 6? The third option is that you have syntactic class rigidity, but functional flexibility. You can see a little bit of this in English because we can verb nouns fairly productively, and we can use nouns as modifiers to other nouns without explicitly deriving them into adjectives. We can distinguish nouns from adjectives because they have different morphological properties, and nouns can do things that adjectives can't, but there are rigid classes that exist. But there is functional flexibility. Something that is rigidly defined as a particular class can nevertheless sometimes do the same things that a different rigid class can also do. They don't have to be functionally completely distinct. And most of the time they aren't. So if you make all of your differentiated lexical classes flexible in the right ways, then they can all be the head of a predicate phrase. So, what about zero derivation? I just told you in English we have some functional flexibility. We can turn nouns into verbs pretty freely, but being able to verb all the things by itself does not make you omnipredicative. So, for example, I could tell you all that I'm going to Logan it up here, and that is syntactically correct, and you probably wouldn't have any idea what it means unless you know me. Because in English, when you verb a noun, there is not a consistent way to predict exactly what it will mean when it is converted into the head of a predicate. So Hawaiian, it's in the same large language family Polynesian as Tongan is, and there are a lot of words which on the surface look like you can put them in the predicate position or the argument position, but the difference in meaning between those positions is not always obvious and predictable. Zero derivation is not omnipredicationality. You need to be able to predict the entire difference in meaning from using a word in one syntactic position versus another from the semantics of the syntax, and not just random lexical changes. So we're going to look at 3 conlangs that I have worked on that demonstrate these 3 approaches. The first one is tlakanak, the second one is farahrusha, and the third one is kodzain. You don't have to remember how to pronounce those. I am really bad at pronouncing most of them myself, which if you watched the Let's Have a Relay, you will know, because I totally biffed that. So I've got a trilogy of languages, which I like to call the languages of spite, because I read a paper once that said, this particular typological combination can't exist. And I'm like, oh yeah? I'm going to prove you wrong. So 2 of those are in this list. One of them is not. But Tlakanak came from reading a paper that said, if you have a monocategorial language or a precategorial language, basically the same, different word for the same thing, that's type 1 in Hengeveld's hierarchy, then it cannot have fusional morphology. Now, observationally, most of the languages that people claim fall into that category don't have fusional morphology. But why the heck couldn't they? So that's why I constructed Tlakanak. It's got nominative accusative mostly, but also some Austronesian alignment just kind of happened accidentally. But the important bit for this talk is that every root, every lexical root, has a semantic argument structure with at least absolutive and ergative slots. Now you might be thinking, well, what about the things that are really obviously nouns in English? Not everything can have 2 arguments packaged up into it. Like, what are the 2 arguments of rock? Well, I will pose to you a slightly different question. What are the 2 arguments of father, or grandma, or nephew, or cousin? All of these things we in English encode as nouns, and in most European languages, probably most languages generally, but I wouldn't commit to that because I haven't read all the typology on it, probably most languages encode those kinds of things as nouns, but lots of languages encode them as inalienably possessed nouns, because they do, in fact, have 2 referents encoded in them. We just choose to project one of them as the meaning of a particular phrase that they are used in, pretty much arbitrarily. So in Tlakanak, those are not weird. They're just like any other thing in the content of class. You can stick them into an argument position, you can stick them into a predicate position, and they will have the same argument structure, and there are regular rules for figuring out which argument gets, which logical argument of the underlying logical predicate gets projected as the referent of a phrase. So in n positions, everything projects its absolutive referent. Notice that there's some fun split ergativity thing going on here. On the surface of morphological morphosyntactic agreement, it's nominative accusative, but underlyingly, everything is defined in terms of ergative and absolutive slots. Agreement affixes allow you to turn roots into modifiers and stick them into the AdjP and ADVP positions. V positions in the syntax force an active reading. This also comes from observations of natural languages. Not all languages that allow converting other stuff into verbs will do this. Nahuatl notably does not. And that's one of the common languages that people will look at and say, if you squint, this could be monocategorial. It doesn't do this, but lots of languages do. It is something that I now look out for when I am reading new grammars. And it is shocking how often I will find some little note somewhere that's like, oh yeah, if you turn this thing into a verb, then it automatically means to become, because that's the easiest way to get an active reading out of an entity. Become the thing, rather than be a thing. And that makes it kind of difficult to say things like, I am Logan. I'm not becoming Logan all the time, I just am. So there are copula constructions explicitly to allow you to force a state of reading out of stuff. There is CP-DP parallelism. Again, this is not uncommon in lots of languages. Basically, that means the structure of your clause looks a lot like the structure of your noun phrase. And in particular, specific prepositions allow you to access the internal semantic arguments of roots that happen to be used as nouns. So here, a really easy way to see that happening in English is with deverbal nouns like eating, and we can say Bob's eating of the apple as an equivalent to the clause Bob is eating the apple. This is one of the few places in English grammar where the Saxon genitive and the other genitive actually have different semantics, and it's important. So, possessive morphology and conjugation morphology happen to be identical in Tlakanak because it has this CP-DP parallelism, because that is reflecting the fact that the heads of DPs and the heads of CPs are in the same lexical class. So we can look at a few examples of how this actually works in practice. On the top, you've got a copular sentence. There's a lot of complex morphological stuff going on there, but that's not the point of this talk, so I'm only glossing the stuff that actually matters. Yes, that word for man is morphologically complex. It's not just randomly that long. So we get first singular accusative pronoun. You can ignore the fact that it's an accusative. It's, again, because copular sentences are weird. But first person singular pronoun, copula to force a state of reading, the word for man in the attributive inflection, and that's the stative. I am a man, because, yes, I am. Then somebody, a young boy going through a rite of passage ritual or something might say, I am becoming a man. That turns out to be a lot easier to say because man, when as referring to an entity, when put in the predicative position, regularly and predictably does what all references to entities do and forces a non-static active reading. And then we can see in the last example, I'm going to use a single root in both referential and predicative positions. So you can see they really are the same thing. They're really doing the same. They're behaving in a regular way. They're doing exactly what the rules say they should do. So if I say the man, if I want to say the man is eating my food, I take a root that means to eat, and eat obviously has two arguments. It's not like something like rock, where you have to think, okay, what would the second argument be? Rock has one. Turns out it's the possessor, and there are good reasons why it has to be that. I'm not going to bother explaining all that. You can talk to me about it later. But eat refers to an action, has two arguments, totally obvious to see what those are. The absolutive argument of eat is food. So when we put it in the predicate position, which happens to be at the end of the sentence in this language, then it means it's going to take a possessive suffix which agrees with the man, so we know that that's the subject. But then when we put it into a referential position, it will project its absolutive argument, not its ergative argument, and that's how we get the word for food. Another example. So I mentioned the word father earlier. Here's an example of how that works out. If you stick father into the predicate position, the absolutive argument of father is, or the absolutive argument is father. That's why I translate that word as father. If the absolutive argument were the child of the parent, then that would be the word child. But it's not. It's the word for father. So when you put it in the predicate position, the ergative argument gets promoted to the subject. It agrees with the subject using that thing that is in other positions identical to the possessive suffix. But yeah, if you put a absolute state, that's what I was trying to think of. If you put an absolute state suffix on it and use it in a nominal position, then it's going to project the absolutive, and thus it gets translated as father. Okay, language number 2. This goes all the way to the other end of the spectrum. Valaklusha is supposed to be a pure type 7 language. In this one, Jelinek and Diemers wrote a paper where they had a footnote saying that a reviewer thought that they were being dumb, but no, the reviewer is dumb. And I looked at that footnote and I said, no, the reviewer was totally right, you're being dumb. A language of class 7 type can totally do this thing. So I built Valaklusha to prove it. There are several things in Valaklusha that are not required just to meet that engineering design requirement. So it does some other crazy stuff that makes things a little more complicated. Like, you can only have a maximum of one non-pronominal argument in a clause. So if you need to say something like, Bob kicked Joe, or something like that, and then got arrested, you can't do that monoclausally. But it turns out not to actually be all that bad. So how do we do arguments at all? It turns out there are no lexical nouns, but you still have determiner phrases, and it's just that instead of sticking a noun into a determiner phrase, you always have to put a relative clause there. That means relativization has to be dirt cheap. You can't be saying the one who for every single noun in your sentence. That would just be ridiculous. So if you have a determiner before the root, then you just assume it is automatically relativized. Only subjects can be relativized, which means we don't need any other morphology for the most common case. You just stick the determiner on there, and we know that we're going to relativize the subject and pull it out of that clause, and that's what we're referring to. There is complex voice morphology, which means that you can turn any argument of a clause into the subject for that extraction. And most modifier positions are handled by verb serialization. You don't need modifiers of referential phrases because there aren't any of those. So, yesterday, Lycan mentioned the Where Are Your Keys curriculum for learning a foreign language. I actually tried to put a bunch of example sentences from that into this presentation, but most of them, it turned out, didn't show the correct alternations. But these ones are useful. So this is taken from a portion of the Where Are Your Skis, not Where Are Your Skis, Where Are Your Keys curriculum. And at the top there, we have pat-ha-se, which just means this is a stick. If you didn't know anything else about the language, you could think that, oh, pat-ha just means stick, and this must be like a zero copula construction or something. No, it is totally not. You can, but we don't know that just from this slide. You can insert some post-verbal particles in there. If you already know that those are post-verbal particles, then that might give you some indication that something weird is going on. But again, maybe it's just like a zero copula construction and you can still stick the particles in there. But let's look at these pairs of sentences. Notice that I have multiple participants in these examples, and it's actually not that bad. The only thing that makes it weird is that one of them has to lack a determiner, and we're turning one of them into the main predicate of the sentence. So basically, either the guy or the coyote has to turn into a verb somehow. So first one, the man hits it. We don't know what it is, but somebody is hitting it. Maybe he's a baseball player or something. The obvious way to translate that from English is to make hit the head of the predicate. So that is the root tupund, and then we have the man, che sutela, and yeah, so hit the man. The man hits it. But we don't have to do that. We can swap it around and make the other root into the head of the clause and relativize the other one. They still end up sharing the same argument slot, and it means the same thing. So swetche tupuntra is sort of the one who is a hitter is a man. And then we can also do So I lost my train of thought. Why did I put that example there? Farakusha has a negative verb construction. So if we want to say that something is not the case or that something is not something else, there's a special verb, and then you have to nominalize the original clause and put it as an argument to the negative verb. Yeah, I definitely had a reason for putting those up there that was something different from just saying, oh yeah, it also has this interesting typological feature. I don't remember what it was, but I mean, stare at that and maybe you'll get some insight into how omnipredicationality works. I should have written better notes. Okay, Kodzane is the youngest language in this set. It was not constructed out of spite. It was basically constructed because there's a middle to that hierarchy, and I was like, there should be something in the middle, so I figured it out. It is loosely based on the grammar of Khoikhoi, which is extremely difficult to find documentation on. So, it is strongly differentiated in the German style with distinct nouns, verbs, and modifiers, which are rigidly distinguished by morphological and syntactic distribution arguments. Nouns can head referential phrases and predicate phrases. They can modify referential phrases, but they can't modify predicates. So that's basically just, I thought, oh, the thing that English can do where you just put a noun next to another noun and it's fine is kind of cool, so I'll steal that. And we know that they are different from modifiers because unlike in Tlakanak, nouns that get stuck into a predicate position induce a state of reading. That's one of the things that makes them nouns. Modifiers are going to modify anything. They can modify noun phrases, the argument phrases, or they can modify predicate phrases. It's fine. But unlike nouns, when you stick them into a predicate position, they act more like verbs and they have a default active reading. Again, I can justify this by referring to English. When we zero derive adjectives into predicates, then most of the time they actually do turn out to be inceptive, as in to yellow, as in, you know, to yellow meaning to turn yellow with age, or to brown, like to brown meat in a pan. Okay, so Kodzane also has non-lexical syntactic categories. So these are things that are distinct types of nodes in the syntax tree. They're types of phrases you can build, but there is no single word that just has that type on its own. So like prepositional phrases, there are, or actually postpositional phrases. They're PPs either way. Postpositional phrases, there are postpositions, but you don't have a whole postpositional phrase without adding something else to it. It can't be just a single word. Full CPs, clause phrases, there's no single words that just are a clause by themselves. But it turns out all of these also can function in the head of a predicate. So we have two noun cases in Kodzane. There's a nominative, which is just for basically a noun that is not dependent on anything else, which is the head of a subject phrase or the head of the predicate. And then there's a subordinate case, which marks everything else. And having those two cases allows you to more easily mark the boundary between where the subject ends and where the predicate begins. There's a super basic overview of the clause structure that's just highlighting the things that you need to be able to recognize in order to parse out where is the subject and where is the predicate. It's way more complicated in reality, but we don't need to get into that right now. Oh, but you should go see one of my previous LCC talks on quantification for conlangers about some of the stuff that I am leaving out of here. So, examples from Kodzane. First, we've got si kekai. So, si is our third person singular pronoun. Ke, again, you could, if you didn't know anything about this language except here's an example and here's the translation, you might think that that could be a copula. It's not. that is just a particle saying that this is a declarative sentence. You could leave it out, and that would still be a grammatically valid sentence. It would just be in a different mood. But it could still look like, maybe there's a zero copula thing going on. But we can also put in an entire determiner phrase, or just a bare noun phrase. So here we have, this is a big table. That's just a bare noun phrase that is being stuck into the predicate position. And because we're using a noun there, then it induces the state of reading. Notice in the first example, it's an adjective, does what an adjective is supposed to do. It induces the act of reading. If we stick a determiner onto the end, which incidentally you might notice is identical to the third person pronoun, that is not accidental, but the reasons for that, again, are outside the current scope. But if you turn it into a DP, you can still stick it into that particular syntactic slot. It still works as a predicate. It means something slightly different because obviously it should mean something different. It's a different phrase that's got more stuff on it. And then down here, we've got, I am giving you a pineapple. So this is more the normal thing where you've got a thing that sounds like it should be a verb, being the head of the predicate. Yeah, it looks pretty much just like you would expect an SOV language to look. You've got the first person pronoun, modal particle, indirect object, direct object. Those are both in the subordinate case, telling you that they are definitely not part of the subject, and then verb at the end. Why do I have this example up here if it looks totally normal? It's just to show you that this is not syntactically distinguishable from the previous examples. So if you were wondering, well, I want to argue that that particle you put in there, it really is a copula, or there's really a zero copula next to that, well, then what the heck is give doing? You don't put a copula in front of a finite verb. So those all behave exactly the same. You can stick any part of speech into the predicate slot, and there are regular syntactic rules for interpreting what the semantics is going to be. So yeah, there we go. I hope I talked fast enough to not run out of time and have lots of time for questions. So questions? Yay me. Yes.
Earlier you mentioned something about kinship terms.
Yes.
Many of them are, as you said, inalienable possessions.
Mm-hmm.
I've also read that in some languages there are actually kinship verbs. That,
Yes.
For instance, I've read about an Australian language, Iwaija, which has a
Mm-hmm.
verb that means to be the father of.
Mm-hmm.
Notably, it's not the same as the English zero derivation to father.
Yep.
Because this verb specifically is used for the person the child considers their father, no matter
Mm-hmm.
whether they're the biological father
Yep.
or not. And what's especially interesting with those kinship verbs in Iwaija is that they inflect more tense.
Yep.
But in the past tense, they specifically refer to a relative who is deceased.
Mm-hmm.
And in the future tense, they specifically refer to someone who isn't born yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, in your creations, how does omnipredicationality interact with TAM?
So differently in each case. Like in Tlakanak, where I had that example, it would basically be transparent what you would expect if you translated it into English. So you will be his child, you were his child, maybe, and there's not an obvious interpretation of what that should mean pragmatically, but maybe there's an adoption going on, maybe somebody was disowned. But yeah, it doesn't necessarily imply that anybody died or hasn't been born yet. But I do want to point out, you gave me another great example to back up one of my points. When you zero-derive father into a verb in English, it has an active reading.
Super quick, something you might
Yeah.
want to look at too. There's a lot of stuff about
is just being stuck directly on nouns.
Yes.
And, like, I mostly know it from like third line.
Mm-hmm.
There's like comes a nominal derivation, which is actually just transparently from the tenses. So it's like
Yep.
the former noun or like the noun that eventually tends to become something in the future and stuff like that.
Yeah, nominal tense is a whole other thing on its own, and there's 2 or 3 different ways that languages can interpret it. Oh, another thing to point out, to mother is also a zero-derived verb, and it means nothing like the same sort of thing as to father does, which is just further proof that zero derivation is not semantically regular in English, so we can't call English omnipredicational. Any other questions? I have no idea what time I started, so...
You've got plenty of time.
Okay, I talked super fast. Okay.
Are any of your languages inspired by Auxlang or other logical languages, since they also have this property?
Out of these ones, no, not explicitly. I have worked on loglangs in the past, but that's kind of cheating. Like, if you don't need to be naturalistic, then you can do whatever the heck you want, and yeah, it's super easy to create an omnipredicational language of any of those types. But kind of the point here is that there are natural languages which maybe not definitely do all of these things according to everyone unambiguously, but at least have been legitimately argued to do these things by some professional linguist. So if you want to do these things, you don't have to build a loglang. You can build a naturalistic artlang that does the cool thing. And there's several ways that you can go about that. Incidentally, since we have plenty of extra time now, I'm not going to use all of it because the schedule is whacked and I'm fine with providing some extra buffer. But yesterday, John told everybody when he put my examples up on his slideshow to come ask me about architectured languages, and nobody has done that yet. So I'll tell you what that means right now. It's my own word. I want it to catch on. It hasn't caught on yet. Maybe it will now. But especially, well, actually all 3 of these are good examples, but especially the languages of spite. You could think of these as engineered languages insofar as they have a very specifically defined logical, objectively evaluable design goal to meet. It has to behave in this specific way and have these specific properties in order to be the language that I set out to create. And part of the reason for creating it was to prove that that could actually be done and that the resulting language was functional. I was really, really happy when we did the let's have a relay and the next person in the ring actually successfully translated out of Falaklusha, and I was like, aha! Finally, proof it works. That made me feel very warm and fuzzy. I succeeded, yes. But you will also notice that I said at many points, there's a bunch of other morphological complexity here that I'm ignoring because it's not relevant for this particular subject. And so I did a lot more with Klakanak and Falaklusha than was strictly necessary just to say, look, I have engineered a thing that does the thing. Academic statement refuted. Now we're done. Because that's not fun, and I want the languages to be fun. So what do I mean by an architectured language? It's an analogy to like actual architecture. You can engineer a building that will stand up and hold people inside of it, and it doesn't need to look like the outside of these buildings do, because an architect was involved. And an architect is not the same thing as an engineer. An architect has some element of artistic input into the work. So what I consider my conlanging process to be is largely engineering, because I almost never start a language without an englangy goal, so that I can say, yes, I finished it, it is done, it has done the thing. but I want it to be embellished. I want it to look naturalistic. I want to prove that this could actually be a language that people could use, not just an engineered artifact that looks artificial. So it's got irregularities. It's got random extra grammar that isn't strictly needed, but it's kind of fun, and it's got all those bells and whistles and cornices and columns that make it into not just an engineered language, but an architected language. So there you go. That's my spiel. Everybody should start using that term now. Yes?
So as you made these like 3 languages with these constraints on them, I guess is there anything from them maybe that you didn't even anticipate, but as you were trying to like meet these constraints, or like interesting things that came out of it that might be
Yes. Yes. So if I go back to, whoops. What happened? Go forward. Where's the right example? It's in the Valaklusha slides. Okay, so this construction where you can swap those 2 roots around and it basically means the same thing. It doesn't mean exactly the same thing because that would be boring, but you don't need to know all the pragmatic nuances right now. So I didn't need to restrict clauses to only having a single non-pronominal argument. I did that because the paper that inspired me to create Valaklusha was about Salishan languages, and there are some Salishan languages and other not technically Salishan, but northwestern United States indigenous languages that actually do have that constraint. And so I thought, it would be thematically appropriate to play around with that and see what happens. And my assumption going in was that, you can only have 1 argument per clause. Then I'm going to have to do a lot of repetition and multi-clausal conjoined constructions. And I pretty quickly found out that actually I don't think any natural languages necessarily work this way, but I can just do this. And technically, both of these are complex multi-clausal sentences, but one of the clauses is 1 word long. And yeah, basically you end up with an article stuck in an unexpected place given what it applies to, but otherwise you have two things in the sentence and they just go together, and it worked out nicely. And yeah, so that was unexpected. There are definitely some other ones. For Tlakonak, I put it on here that it's nominative accusative / Austronesian alignment. I didn't go into that thinking that it would have Austronesian alignment because I've tried to do Austronesian alignment on purpose before, and I have studied enough typology papers that I feel like I know what Austronesian alignment is, but if I try to do it on purpose, it's just like, this feels artificial and it's not fun. It's a mass-produced McDonald's, not a colonial facade, to extend the metaphor. But when I started working on Tlakonak, it just kind of happened. It was supposed to be nominative accusative, and then as a result of the fact that everything is pre-categorial and everything has an argument structure, and sometimes you need a way to select something other than the default absolutive because you want to refer to that other thing, it just one day I noticed, wait a minute, this is Austronesian now. Oops. So that was fun. Anybody else? It wasn't supposed to be, but that is as good of an interpretation as any, so sure. It was actually a reference to a short story by Arkady Martin. And if you don't know who Arc de Martin is, go read a memory called Empire, which has a conlang in it.
Seeing no further questions, let's thank Logan again.
Yay me! And now I have the impetus to close the laptop and walk off, but that is not my laptop, so I'll just leave it there for you.
But we have a bit of a break. I'll try to find the next speaker so he can start at 5:30 on time, but we have 15 minutes, so go stretch, get some more food, look at a poster.
Yeah. Oh, Mike. Yes. I would have totally forgotten about that.
is wise.
Okay, that's attached.
We've just announced you talk in the next room, so
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, cool.
resuming at 5:30, so we have a little bit.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't want break. I want slides from the presenter. There we go. Check the screen.
Okay.
Screen's doing what it's meant to be doing. It's an intimate audience.
Yeah, everybody interested is here.
Everybody interested is here.
And everybody that's here is interested. That's what I meant.
Yeah, some, yeah, if then if.
Yeah, yeah.
Schmonverse, okay.
Okay.
Shall we start?
Yeah, I'll rip it.
All right. Let's go with the last talk of the session today. Carter or Cartero Williams will tell us about lessons to learn from Esperanto and interactive retrospective.
Yeah, yeah. So I've cut the interactive part out of here, out of the title slide, because I wanted to make sure that I'd make time. But given that there's so few of us, maybe the Q&A will be very interactive. Let's see. Yeah. So about me. I'm just some Esperantist, so I picked this up during the pandemic. I've gone to some of the universal congresses, traveled a bit, made a lot of friends, made some crossword puzzles, one of which you can see in the library over there in the Usona Esperantisto. Yeah, so basically, my experience with Esperanto has been largely positive. I've gotten something out of that language, and I'm hoping that people who are interested in making either IALs, International Auxiliary Languages, or any language where you want to grow a community of speakers that actually use the language to communicate with each other, that there would be something that you could learn from Esperanto's ability to do that for me, and maybe from the limitations that Esperanto has as a global auxiliary language today. Notably, I'm not an authority on any of this language stuff. My linguistics credentials sum up to about like a B- in a survey course 10 years ago. So I'm going to try to keep myself away from any fancy terminology here. And if I used any, you can let me know how I used it wrong. So this talk, it's not got a lot of conclusions in it, mostly questions. If you were looking for a list of do's and don'ts, you might be a little bit disappointed. It's a woefully abridged version of things. Lots of stuff cut, so much so that the next slide, or the next line here, is about how much history we're going to be talking about, how little, like how it would be contained. I actually cut out all of the slides with dates. So if you're interested in Esperanto history and like any of the ideas from that, feel free to come talk to me. I will talk your ear off. Yeah, so the first kind of like topic that we're going to go over is literature. And you might not think that, I'll say here, they might not think that a language which in no way intends to replace anyone's first culture and first language would need its own independent literary culture. But Zamenhof had a really different idea about that. Notably, Zamenhof had a different idea about that, and he kind of encoded it in from the beginning. So this is like kind of where Esperanto starts on like a world stage, is Zamenhof publishes this first book, or Unua Libro. And in it, he's got a description of the language, why he's doing it. So that's a dictionary, a grammar, in big air quotes. It's like these famous 16 rules, and a call to action. But he's also got, in that first book, he's got some sample texts. And those sample texts kind of like show
a microcosm of the kind of literary repertoire he was hoping that Esperanto would gain. So notably, we get little bits of the Bible. So we get Our Father, which is like a typical thing to demonstrate your language in. We've got the first 10 verses of the creation story. He's got this letter. I actually think the letter is really funny. It's a correspondence between two friends where one is trying to convince the other to come learn Esperanto. And Zamenhof writes that letter like as a demonstration of how you can convince your friends to learn Esperanto. But the letter is in Esperanto. So I just find that kind of ironic because if they're reading the letter, they already know the language. You've got translation, which this is very typical of early Zamenhof Ajoi, which is early works from Zamenhof, which are, it's translated out of German, and it's poetry. Don't have my notes here, forget exactly what the German title and name were, so I won't try to butcher it. And then we've got 2 original poems. So like the traditional perspective is that Zamenhof wasn't the best poet in this early era of Esperanto poetry, but that hasn't stopped his poetry from becoming in the heart of Esperanto culture. So if you ask any, Esperantist who's sufficiently entrenched in this culture, they'll recognize the titles of these poems. And especially, they might be able to recite that last one for you by heart because it's not very long. And I like these poems. Particularly, I like the first one. Maybe they're not even Zamenhof's best, but I think they really sell that it's not like a dry artificial language. And I think that's what Zamenhof was really afraid of, being perceived as creating something that was totally artificial and not capable of expressing the full range of human emotion. And he was afraid that, I don't know, maybe a planned language couldn't do that kind of thing because he didn't see an example doing that before him. And yeah, so that's how he introduced the literary world of Esperanto. Where it kind of went from there is we get translations of the classics like Hamlet, the Bible, the Iliad, and then we get a lot of original poetry. So people who aren't familiar with Esperanto literature might not be aware the proportion of it, which is poetry over prose, especially in this first period. Maybe I'll take out that especially. In all of the periods, there's a lot more original poetry than you would have expected. You get not only these translations of the classics, you get this particular guy named Kabe shows up, and in 1903, he shows up and just starts translating prolifically, nonstop, churning out works. And his perspective was that you needed to translate rather than write original works to set the language up, not only because it's easier to translate than write original works, so you can get a lot more text out, but because translating forces you to actually translate a specific thought that is in front of you. Whereas when you're writing your own works, you can just have a simpler thought to express, and you can kind of get around the lack of idioms and the lack of vocabulary just by not including those things in your work. And then right at the end of this period, we get 2 full-length novels, Chu Li and Castello de Prelongo. They're just these 500-page books. I've heard they're not the best novels, but they do exist, and they kind of set up they were kind of first of their kind in that they were full-length novels written in an artificial language, and it kind of in the same way that someone breaking a record in running the fastest mile sets up breaking that record again because you see, oh, somebody can do it that fast. I can do it too. And you get a lot more of these following the First World War. So what can we learn from this? Why did I bring this up? The literature, as we heard with Kabe saying that translating forces you to be able to express new ideas that you might not have otherwise. It also kind of when you run out of vocabulary, you need to add words. So there's words that just weren't in the dictionary that you need to add because I need to translate this, and this word is being used here. So it changes the language. And this last point is kind of obvious, but it gives the language substance. It creates this sense of shared culture for the Esperanto diaspora, and I don't know, it gives you something to feel like, yeah, I guess this one is very vague. But one result of this is that if there's so much value that exists in the language that people are attached to, if you're going to change that language and invalidate those works, especially in the non-digital era, they're in print, I have the book on my shelf, I don't want the language to change and make this not be the language anymore. So it kind of makes reforms seem less worthwhile. Yeah, so like in summary, there's no do's and don'ts, but it seems like it's important to translate into your language early, to give people things to read, and to give people good things to read, emotionally moving things, because when you read something emotional, you get attached to it. Yeah, so we talked about some nice things about Esperanto. I'm going to do ping-ponging. We're going to go talk about some maybe not so nice things. Esperanto's got some tricky sounds in it. It's got some minimal pairs that are not super easy for speakers of all world languages. Notably, you're going to have to be able to keep your L's and your R's apart because there's rano, kailano, and lano. You'll need to be able to keep your B's and your P's apart because there's bano, kaipano, and you're going to need to be able to keep your F's and your P's apart because there's also fano. So not everybody can do all of those. Additionally, there's some tricky consonant clusters. So you're going to have to be able to say construi, and you're going to have to be able to say ex stab ano, and you're going to have to be able to utter ce, which is s followed by ee. So you got some vowels coming right one after the other, and you've got this pair of this consonant cluster, which is not super easy. And if you go to an Esperanto Congress, I don't know if the Esperantists here can attest, not everybody always does them. If you listen closely, especially on the tseno or the tseneo, people will drop that first S or they'll minimize one of those because it's really hard. And it's really hard for someone who speaks a Germanic language. It's got to be like really hard for somebody who speaks a language that doesn't do like any of these consonant clusters. So yeah, what's the big picture here? It's this picture here is just like it's like a couch surfing service, but each dot there is somebody who's offering like their house to be stayed at. It's probably fake, a little bit fake because people offer and then like forget that they offered and don't take it off. But anyway, this is just a general like heat map of where Esperantists might be by one metric, and it's not super representative. Obviously, there's people everywhere, but it's not proportional. And if you take a look at the like official positions that might that's like positions where your language ability influences your ability to get to that position, it looks a lot less diverse than it could. And yeah, this is a really big question. It's like, do you have to simplify your phonology all the way down to Tokipona if you want to actually get like worldwide reach? What is like the pragmatic balance to make there? And I'm sure there's something somewhere in between, maybe closer to Tokipona than to Esperanto. There are definitely people who are working on this, so you can go look at the other Auxlang projects that are popular that try to minimize these minimal pairs. But none of them, other than Tokipona, are able to avoid every single distinction that is not common, because like all of these languages are different. Yeah. So again, all questions. Moving on to the next nice thing. Well, I don't know. You can determine if this is a nice thing or not. Sometimes Esperanto gets accused of being a cult. And that, I can see why. It's hard to not see the religious and spiritual themes in the community. And it kind of all starts from the beginning. Zamenhof, in his original speeches, they're full of grandiose and spiritual ideas. Notably, he gives this prayer during the first Congress called the Pregio sub la verde standardo, prayer beneath the green flag, basically. And he calls upon this like mysterious and powerful force, and he uses lots of like vague terminology to describe some supernatural being. And there's an interesting story about this being censored by the secular French academics who were like a little afraid that it was a bit spicy. So they persuaded Zamenhof to cut the last bit of it where he called upon all of the Abrahamic religions to come together as one people, like very explicitly. And yeah, so they cut that line, but it's still in the written down poem if you grab your literary Chrestomatio. It's in there. So Zamenhof introduced his own like spiritual ideas into the movement, like probably yeah, there's a whole lot about Zamenhof's religious ideas, which are a whole nother topic. Ask me about it. But the Esperanto community also wants its own like ceremony to exist, and it's also kind of hard to separate this from like patriotism. But we get the solemn opening and closing of the Universal Congress, which is like this huge ceremony that's like very ritualistic with lots of clapping and singing. You sing a hymn during it, and it feels kind of like, I don't know, I grew up going to those big mega churches, and it feels a lot like that, like the ones with the electric guitars and the drums, you know, all of the music and all of the lights, you know, to kind of give you that feeling in your chest. And then you've got the Esperanto community citing Zamenhof like scripture. So you get lots of like idioms. There's his book of Proverbs that you can cite. Zamenhof's, when you take a citation from Zamenhof in a dictionary, there's a little Z at the end. And it just reminds me of like red lettering in a Bible. If you're familiar, that's the voice of God. So we've got some terminology in Esperanto that is like unique and a little culty. We've got sam idiano, which is same idea member, and that basically is like a word for comrade. We've got nia lingvo, which is just the fact that we refer to the language as our language, which is like this kind of like, I don't know, communal sense to it. So Zamenhof's got a title, La Maestro, or the Maestro. Yeah, it's hard. I had a picture of Zamenhof on the other slide. It's hard to like go to a sufficiently large Esperanto gathering and not have a picture of Zamenhof hanging from a wall somewhere. And we've got, to bring that back, I don't like to name drop people, but I name dropped Kabe earlier. And we've got this word kabei because Kabe kind of burnt out and dropped out of the movement, stopped doing all of his translating. We made a word out of him, which is to become an apostate, which is to leave the movement, basically. And if you don't have a word like that, I don't think you're a cult. So yeah, lessons. Yeah, this is another really hard one. Like, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? What does it do? I think it's useful to, like, for a modern example, if you look at something like Tokipona, like, obviously, it's got this really cool minimal set of words and grammar, and it's got lots of cool things going for it. But one of the things going for it is that it's an idea and a philosophy. And I think that part of it means something to some people. So it's like not the case that you can't make a conlang right now that has philosophical or spiritual themes, and that can connect with people. I think in general, there's a don't actually, to catch a contradiction. Don't be afraid to take yourself a little seriously and make your conlang about something more than just language. As like a bonus, none of these things happen. Well, they might happen online, but where they really happen is in person. Like that opening and closing ceremony, that feeling in your chest is something you get when you're standing surrounded by people once a year. You know, that specialness to it is something that maybe all of you who are here at an in-person congress or an in-person convention can attest to, that there's something really special and something really motivating and inspiring about being surrounded by people who share these ideas. So ping-ponging. We're going back to criticisms. a frequent criticism of Esperanto today is how it treats gender. Notably, the famous "a woman in Esperanto is a type of man." You might have heard that. And it's true. There is a feminine. Yeah, it's true. There is a feminine suffix that is fundamental. And what that means, there's no corresponding masculine suffix. So there's this conflation with neutrality and masculinity. So when you take the feminine suffix off of a root, is that root now masculine because there's no other way to denote masculinity, or is it neutral? Neutral. And it's possible that in the 1800s, that's like, what are you talking about? That's the same thing. But obviously now, those are not the same thing. So back then, there were a lot of words that were inherently masculine neutral that now are just neutral, and that's jobs and friends. So you might hear someone refer to a teacher girl, or like a teacher woman with the feminine suffix, but that's becoming a lot less common. And people do still sometimes use gender when referring to their friends. So like if they want to talk about a friend who's a girl, they might add that suffix where it would be unnecessary if the suffix, or if that word were inherently neutral. I think that's maybe an effect of Romance languages where there is a gender marking on the word friend. But we've got, even with all of like these new things becoming gender neutral, we still have family members' titles and livestock where there's not really a good alternative that is already accepted. Those things are all a masculine neutral root that you can make feminine with a suffix. So there are alternatives though. We've got a masculine suffix to make things symmetrical, and we've got a non-binary suffix with it. And we've got a gender-neutral pronoun, because I didn't mention before, didn't have a gender-neutral pronoun. The way you got to do talking about someone without mentioning their gender is either like avoid using a pronoun. Ooh, I touched the mic. Use a third-person general pronoun, or say he or she, or use even worse, and this, yeah, it's in the language, gender-neutral he, as we were saying before, conflation with masculinity and neutrality. So we've got a win. Recently, actually not that recently now, I guess time is passing, we've got a book that was published both in a form that uses only the fundamental words, so those masculine roots with the feminine suffix words for family, titles, and the pronouns. But then they also published, along with it, a version that uses all neologisms, neoaffixes, and neopronouns. And I've got a copy of that. I probably should have brought it, but I've got a copy of that book. It's pretty cool. This is possibly in response to the Academy, the Official Language Academy, postponing their decision on the pronoun ri because they didn't see, well, okay, for a plethora of reasons, one of them being they didn't see enough usage of the word because the Academy doesn't just make the language, it acknowledges how the language is. So they were like, you got to use it if we're going to put it in. But you know, the Academy's a lot of people, and it's a lot of old people, so the opinions are a lot more complicated than I'm expressing right now. Lessons. Don't not have gender-neutral language in your language. That seems like maybe something you could do. I don't think all of you are doing this. But I think another part of it is like consider your own biases, because I don't think Zamenhof was thinking about this very hard. Most of the stuff that he was doing, he was not trying to invent, but take out of natural languages, and he, probably just wasn't aware of the grave mistake that he was making. It's really hard to change the language because we've got barricades set up against reform. And that makes it hard to officialize stuff like this, especially if it ends up changing like making the masculine pronoun go from masculine neutral to just masculine, that's a change that is like not allowed. So maybe when you set up your community, think about how it could be modernized. I really don't know how to do that. So that's another question just to think about. All right, and then my last topic, it looks like I'm doing all right on time. Last topic is reform resistance. So if you ask any Esperantist why Esperanto survived all of its kin in those early years, they'll probably say like this one, that Zamenhof, seeing the fate of Volapük before it, like handed the language over to its users. So he didn't like fight over control or veto power of the language. And that the language committee, seeing the fate of Volapük, decided that they were going to take the base of the language and say this is untouchable. You can't keep changing it forever, because that had been really detrimental to the success of Volapük as it fractured into multiple pieces. So basically, just to like cover some history. Oh, there's a date on this slide. Catch another contradiction. I said there wouldn't be those. There's this reform proposal in 1894 done by Zamenhof because everybody was clamoring for reforms. And Zamenhof was afraid that they were just gonna happen and he couldn't do anything about it. So he decides, I'm gonna make one reform and I'm gonna make it an ultimatum. I'm just gonna send it out in the big journal of the day and say all of the subscribers can vote and they can accept it, or they can say reject it, or they can accept it but with some modifications, or they can say I just want a different reform. And rejecting it worked, so they did not accept this proposal. And part of it is the proposal was like not great. Zamenhof just took ideas from all over the movement, everybody's complaints. So he took out the definite article because speakers of Slavic languages, which were in large proportion at the time, didn't like the definite article being there. They found that difficult. And then he made the vocabulary more Latinate because the people who were speaking Romance languages wanted it to be more Latinate. And then he took the systemic table of correlatives, so the who, where, what, when, why words, which were all like nice and symmetrical, and he made them more natural and more Latinate, in response to people complaining that the language was too artificial. And then he did a bunch of other things that got rid of the accusative that people didn't like. But all of these things were things that somebody didn't like, but they weren't all things that most people didn't like. So it was not super compatible. And then this only worked for so long. So they rejected the proposal, but then another schism happens. Esperanto and Ido broke into two. So that people took some ideas in that reform, and basically this is like 1907, and that was 94. So somebody can do the math, and this is the thank you 13 years. So a decent amount of time has passed, but people are still thinking about reforming, and more people have entered the movement who didn't see that reform proposal, didn't vote in it. But they basically take some ideas from that and then modify it, and then they modify it again, and then they modify it again. And the idea is that a lot of people who really just wanted to perfect the language end up moving to Ido, and they're really language focused. And a lot of the people who just wanted to go and see, the opening ceremony stayed in Esperanto. So you get people who are like just interested in reading the language and writing the language and speaking it who stay. And it kind of like, stabilizes everything. Yeah, there's the line there. Yeah, lessons. It's not easy to get people to agree on how a language project should go. And the learners are not going to have a lot of tolerance for the language changing underneath them. So maybe if there's any do for this, it's to be clear and communicative with your audience about the stability of your language at any given point, so that they don't get invested and then have it change and then have to relearn, and then they don't have a lot of tolerance for coming back. Yeah, your main branch can coexist with other branches. So the fact that Ido exists didn't kill Esperanto. It might have made it more healthy. And yeah, so this line, so just making this connection to Toki Pona, I think people really respect Sonia Lang, and they respect her usage of the language in the same way people respect, maybe in a healthy way, maybe not, Zamenhof, and they respect his usage of the language, which is maybe good, maybe not, but it leads to this amount of stability. Yeah, so concluding thoughts. I don't know. Like, it's important to make something in your language to get people attached to it. Maybe you should think about who's going to be speaking your language and how to make that easy for them. And this kind of ties back in with the literature one. Give them something emotional to attach to, and maybe give them other reasons to get involved. And then this is maybe the same one as phonetics, but it's also like, think about the people that are going to be speaking your language and whether your language is nice to them and whether it treats them equally on like all kinds of scales. And then make sure that your language is in a state that people can actually start learning it and speaking it before you get your marketing rolling. Yeah, and that's the whole talk.
Questions? I'll go first then. My Esperantist friend, has been trying to read through the Baza Lego Listo.
How fun.
And seems from that there's a fair amount of importance to canon even nowadays. I mean, do you think, would you agree? Do you think the literature in a post-1915 point of view have the same position?
That canon is important? Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I don't know. So the Baza Lego Listo is the only thing I know of that has been, because people obviously want something like that. Like when you get into the language, you're like, I want to read, but I only want to read the best. Where's the list of the best words or the best books? And it's actually kind of hard to find good books because there's so many books. Like if you want to just filter for the best ones, the Baza Lego Listo is one of them. It's outdated, but yeah, people do still talk about it and like respect that book in particular. But you might find like we've got the literary Chrestomatio. Chrestomathy, I think is the English word. I'm using one English and then one Esperanto word because I don't know the other. But there's a book that's like, it's got snippets of all of these other works in it. And that's a book that right now the big Esperanto organization, association will like send, or like they'll like use this in your classes. So people will have Esperanto classes and then they'll buy a box full of these books. And then it'll show up and like you hand out these little books that are just full of snippets. And I think that more than anything is like giving everybody like a shared set of quotations and a shared list of like, oh, I liked that, I should go read that part. Yeah. Don't know if I answered your question at all.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah.
Are there any conlangs that you personally think have like potential for Esperanto level success, or maybe not level, but style?
Yeah. So I think I'll make 2 points. One, yeah, probably, and I can name one that I like. But two, actually maybe no, because I think a lot of this stuff is not linguistic, right? The stuff that's really important is about like the actual community building, and I'm not sure there are a lot of like IALs right now that are at the level of completion and ready to start building that community, and also like really want to do that, like have people involved who are just there to do the community building. But then to pop off the stack and go back to my first answer, like I've been learning Globasa recently, and I think that the person who leads it is charismatic and humble and kind of smart, and like I think that those things kind of add up to like the same kind of like maybe like maybe I could see like a community growing out of this. And it solves like this, it doesn't solve, but it tries to do the phonetics better, and it does the gender better, but maybe the cultural bias part better too. We'll see how that pans out. So like maybe, yeah. Yeah.
Do you think, because you talk about the reform and like maybe the stability that the academy could maintain, do you feel that that's necessary, some sort of single centralized authority for an IAL, or is there a point at which maybe the language has enough inertia to kind of decentralize a little bit and allow for a little bit of those more natural nuances?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think Esperanto is decentral, and it does have naturalistic nuances that have arrived. The fact is, the academy doesn't dictate the language, right? It just exists and acknowledges it, and you're allowed to ignore it. So people use like ri is like people will know what you mean, even though that's not an official word. And there are lots of words that aren't official that are used every day. But I think the value of having an academy is for the same reason that like Zamenhof did the reform. If you don't have an academy, someone's gonna want to set up an academy. So you kind of have to fill the vacuum. But that's like my off the top of my head idea. Yeah, or at least like either they don't want to set up an academy, but they want to reform. So I think it's this idea, no matter how you get it, of we respect the language as it is right now, and you're not allowed to just change fundamental things because you think it's a toy. Yeah, I'm not sure Esperanto is at the point where people don't start learning it and go, this is a toy, because they're just started learning it. They haven't been to an event, they haven't spoken it, they haven't read in it. So like they don't realize how real it is, even though it is real to those people. Yeah. Yeah. Just make it small.
Yeah, exactly. Just make it simple. Yeah.
So the common part is going to be the smaller part, right? Like if you think about the intersection of all languages, it's going to be smaller than any of the languages that are involved there. So like, yeah, definitely they're like related ideas. But you know, like I was saying, the balance is always going to be, if you want it to be expressive enough to function as like a whole language that's used for all human activities, it's really hard to go minimal with that. Like there's stuff that you like don't want to add, but like you just need something to make a distinction that you think people would complain if they didn't have, you know. But that's the problem with complaining. Someone's always going to be complaining. Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe that's a note to end on, because there is food in the other room. Conversations can continue, but
yes.
Let's thank Carter again and wrap up this.